Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Among the many unforeseen consequences of the pandemic is the high number of people who are leaving the teaching profession. Add to that the low number of people entering the profession, and you have a situation that is bordering on catastrophic. Now, this may sound like hyperbole, but this country is facing a teacher shortage like no other time in history. There are millions of students in need of extra academic support who won't get it. In schools that are experiencing increased numbers of students due to families emigrating from other countries or even other states, class sizes will increase. And considering teaching makes all other professions possible, what does this say for the future of our global economy and our country's standing in it? The teacher shortage is a real thing, and every state is impacted by it. To help us understand how we got here, some of the implications, and explore some possible solutions to the teacher shortage, today we welcome Dana Bryson, Senior Vice President of Social Impact at Study.com. Ms. Bryson, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you, Kevin. Happy to be here this morning.
No, it's my pleasure to have you with us today. So to kind of get us right into this whole thing, tell our listeners just how many teaching vacancies we are talking about in this year alone.
You know, Kevin, this year we've got almost 150,000 vacancies across the country, in teacher vacancies across the country. But really, I want to focus a bit on where these vacancies are because they're not equally distributed. Not surprisingly, we see them more in communities of color and low-income communities, places that have more Title I schools, you know, where a large majority of students are above the federal poverty line. And so poor rural and urban districts. So let me talk about both, and you laid this out in the beginning, Kevin, both recruitment, the teachers going into the pipeline, but also retention and turnover, because that's where we're also seeing huge problems. And so in states that are the hardest hit, that have these higher that have more Title I school students, we see double the rate of teacher turnover than in higher income schools. And so this morning, I'm excited to talk about both recruitment and retention, but we're about 150,000 short. And I can talk a little bit about what's happening. I can talk some about the numbers in New York. So the U.S. Department.
We're going
to talk about New York in a minute. Right?
Yeah, I'll get us into those numbers in a minute, but I want to get into, I guess, some of the history, because some people may be thinking, oh, this is just a new thing, a new phenomenon, because we've seen an exodus of teachers, or at least teachers taking like early retirement because of remote learning and because of all the other added pressures that have been placed on them within the last 3 or 4 years because of COVID. But this is a situation that has actually been going on for years before COVID even began. So how did we get to where we are now? How did we get to having this large number of teachers who are either leaving the profession or just not coming into it? How do we get to this shortage?
It's a great question, Kevin. I mean, it's multifactorial, right? I mean, the first thing is where are the young folks who are interested in becoming teachers? How do we respect the profession of teaching? Is it something, do we pay correctly? No. So there is not a lot of respect, the same respect that there needs to be. The pay rates are too low across the nation. And students are coming to school with lots of needs that are outside of academic needs. So the teachers are needing to step in and provide social emotional support. And as we know, this has been going on for decades. So there has been a teacher shortage in this country for at least 15 years. What we're seeing with the pandemic in the last few years is higher in reporting of burnout and of teachers who say they intend to leave the profession within 5 years. And so that's a significant issue. But we've in the last 15 years, we haven't had enough classroom teachers, and we see higher rates of turnover, as I mentioned at the top of the discussion, in Title I schools. So, and this really affects student learning and student outcomes, which I believe should be the North Star. Academic success, social emotional success for our students is what we're going for. And so this is not a new phenomenon. But I do, as a parent, I can say, and I have a 10 and 12-year-old in public schools, in Denver public schools in Colorado. And it was the last 2 years, I think a lot of parents and educators woke up to how difficult the job of teaching our students is. And I hope that has helped shake loose some policy changes that will make it easier to remove barriers to becoming a teacher and give the right compensation and respect to the teaching profession that'll want more of our students aspiring to be teachers.
And I want to actually touch on that aspect of this issue a little bit later on when we start talking about solutions, because as you mentioned, parents have had their eyes opened as to exactly what teachers go through on a daily basis from 8 a.m. until 3, 4 o'clock, what they actually do. And I used to joke when I was teaching, I used to joke with my friends that going back to that old 70s Army commercial where they say we do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. I said, well, that's the teacher. The teachers do more before 9 a.m. but than most people will do all day. And now parents are actually getting to see that in action. So we'll get to those solutions on how parents can actually become advocates for teachers as well when we get to that.
Yeah,
but right. But I know also that there are some states such as Arizona, I think you have pointed out at one point in an interview you did, that have loosened their requirements kind of to become a teacher. So what were those requirements and how were they loosened? Because I don't want people to think that, oh, my God, we have unqualified teachers in our classrooms. But but what are some of the issues that can come about when you start to loosen those requirements a little bit?
Right. The first thing I want to say emphatically is that teaching is a profession. It is a profession that requires educated, experienced individuals who show the capacity to learn, the knowledge, that have the skills, that understand the pedagogy, the way that you teach and the way you have differentiated learning to serve all of your students. Teaching is a profession, and it needs to stay that way. And so I think it's very important to have rigorous standards for our educators if they're going to be in the classroom with our students. And I do see some great policies, changes that are happening that I think will support having both high standards and more diverse teacher pipeline coming into the classrooms. So you can see there are bills around the country that are allowing some reduction in, actually, I think New York recently reduced let me just make sure, I'm just looking at my notes here. I don't have New York at my fingertips.
Yeah, that's okay. I know New York, there's the TEACH program or the TEACH system where they actually have to go through a series of tests that they have to take and so forth. So I know that at one point, the state was allowing teachers to circumvent that particular test in order to become qualified to become a teacher. Yeah,
and we're seeing that. So the most common test across the country is called the Praxis test. I believe it's in 26 states. It could be more than that. And that's a test that has a core component and has the subject specific. So if you want to be a math teacher, you take the Praxis Core and then you take the subject specific. And we're seeing some states eliminate the requirements for the Praxis Core because if you have been, let's say, a paraprofessional working in the classroom for 2 decades as many of our aspiring candidates are, and you want to go on to be a let's say you want to be an English teacher. Do you really need to pass algebra, geometry, calculus on a Praxis Core in order to be an English teacher? I would say no. So I think reducing some of the requirements on the Praxis Core or on other state-specific, like New York is doing, I think really looking at alternative pathways, and that's what Keys to the Classroom, our national initiative, is focused on. What are those alternative pathways where we're getting some non-traditional students who are interested in becoming teachers, but really didn't come through a traditional college route, some of them, or maybe having a career change. And so we're really looking at eliminating those barriers for those types of students who are coming through alternative pathways. So I know that some states are looking at allowing short-term credentials for military veterans. I've seen that coming out of Florida. I think what's important is that we understand that teaching is a profession, that we need to maintain high standards, and we need to try to, at the same time, look at policy changes that are eliminating, to eliminate some barriers to entry.
I know, and again, I know here in New York, when you mentioned some of those pathways, those alternate pathways to teaching. I know here in New York, there are several programs that they look into. Even nationally, there's the Teach for America program. You have the and programs like that. And in New York, you have New York City Men Teach to bring in more men into the profession and so forth. And I think, like you said, a lot of those alternate pathways give credit for the experience that you have in those other areas. So if you are coming from law per se, then and you want to go and teach history, you can carry those credits over with you that you earned in law school that will enable you to or facilitate you getting that license to teach history. And so I think that's very important for people to understand as well, that they can use that prior experience, the prior credits that they've already earned to help them get, and in some cases even propel them even further to get that initial license in order to be able to become a classroom teacher.
Well, that's exactly right. And we see other apprenticeship and residency programs like that, where you are going to school to be a teacher while you're working in the classroom. And so you maybe are going to school at night, you meet once a week with your cohort and your professor, but you're really and you're supervised, but you have a classroom during the day. So, and that's been going on, as you know, Kevin. I mean, those programs have been around for decades.
Yeah.
It's just that I think we need to really focus on what's working in those programs, because we need more diverse teacher candidates and teachers in our classrooms. We know that there's a relationship between having the same race, ethnicity teacher and some student outcomes in terms of self-esteem, in terms of end-of-year standardized test rates, in English and math. And so we're really working to diversify the teacher pipeline, because all states and all districts are not hit evenly. And we're trying to do something about that through our Keys to the Classroom program.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Dana Bryson, Senior Vice President of Social Impact at Study.com. So since we're talking about that, and you've mentioned the Keys to the Classroom a couple of times, I'm sure some people, our listeners, are thinking, well, what is that? What is that? So before we get to that, and some of our listeners may be aware of what Study.com actually is and what it provides, but I'm sure there are a lot of listeners that don't. So explain to our listeners, what is Study.com? What is your role there? And then talk to us a little bit about the Keys to the Classroom.
So Study.com is an online education platform, and we provide academic support for learners and educators. So we have about 35 million folks a month who come to our site. We have learners and educators in 9,000 school districts across the country, and we've been around for 2 decades. So we have been working in online academic support for 2 decades, and this really has helped us learn a lot about what works. We are a for-profit company with a nonprofit mission, and the mission is to make education accessible. And so I, as Senior Vice President of Social Impact, work on the executive team to really design, my background's in public policy, so to design programs that serve the public good, that use the resources that we have in partnership with community to help with student outcomes and student success. So that's what we had in mind when we designed Keys to the Classroom. So Keys to the Classroom was designed to help combat the teacher shortage nationwide and diversify America's teacher pipeline. We focus through donations. There's no cost to anyone. This is a social impact donation program. We help future educators prepare for and pass their exams, whether that's the Praxis. It's anywhere around the country. Right now we're in 10 states. We have 14 programs. And we provide scholarship licenses for test prep materials to pass this exam. So you might ask, well, why is that important? Why is the scholarship for test prep exam important?
That was my next question.
Okay, I'm going to tell you, because that was my question when we were looking to design a program. With my public policy hat, it was, tell me how this is going to help the problem. Kevin, one of the biggest barriers to becoming a teacher is passing the certification exam. 50% of teacher cadets fail on their first attempt to pass the exam, and 25% never pass. And this is what I'm going to tell you here is the piece that's personally most upsetting to me. Let's talk about what happens if you're Black African American. 38% of Black African American teacher cadets, teacher candidates who take the Praxis test don't pass. 57% if you're Hispanic Latinx, and 75% if you're white. So this is a barrier. You have already gotten your bachelor's degree, you have already gone to school, you have already studied teaching, you're studying for your exam, and after all that, you don't pass. So we really designed a partnership program where we work, as I mentioned, right now we're in 10 states, but we partner with state departments of education, we partner with nonprofits, we partner with unions, we partner with school districts. And I'm really proud to say that right now, 50% of the teacher cadets in our program around the country identify as people of color. And a third identifies African American, which is 5 times higher than the National Teaching Corps representation. Because as you or the listeners I know you know, Kevin, but the listeners may not know, only 7% of our teachers nationally identify as Black African American. 7%, right? So we're really interested in changing some of those numbers. And so we've got, 5 times the national average in our program. So we also see that when people use study.com to prepare for their tests, they pass at 92%. And so we coupled those together and developed this program. So we've got hundreds of teacher cadets enrolled in our program right now around the nation. Got some other big national partnerships coming. I'd be happy to talk about maybe in 6 months or so, some of these big partnerships, but we're trying to really disrupt this problem with passing the exam and advocate alongside these wonderful programs around the country to show what works, to collect the data and show what works.
And it's interesting because when I first looked at study.com, I thought of it as a support for students, with high school students, middle school students, and so forth. And it does do that for students and their families to give them that extra classroom support. I didn't think of it in terms of educators and adult learners who are going back to study for particular exams. And I know it's something that's really needed because, as you pointed out, there are a lot of people that just cannot pass those exams. When I was a fledgling teacher, a lot of my colleagues were stressing out about twice a year because that's when the exams were given. And they knew that, oh my God, if I don't pass it this time, what am I going to do? Because they've already failed the test twice before, and they know 3 strikes and you're out, especially here in New York. So they were like, if I don't pass it now, what am I going to do? So there was that added stress and things. So having a resource like study.com, I think, would be a benefit to a lot of people who are thinking about going into the profession and to kind of to help them along. We have study aids for the other professions, the study for the MCAT, the study for the LSAT, and things like that. So, and for the bar exam. So why not for teaching exams?
Well, that's exactly right. And, we at study.com, we've got a full academic curriculum for 4th through 12th grades. So we are in schools and school districts around the country, as I mentioned, 9,000 of them. We also have 1,500 test prep materials. So we offer test prep in all of those areas that you mentioned, MCAT, LSAT, GRE, etc. Just right now, we're very focused on teachers because we value teachers so much. And we see how hard, we honor teachers, quite frankly. We see how hard and how brave they are to be in the profession, and that they're, I wrote an article last year that was reflecting on my own experience as a mixed race woman in Denver public schools. And I did not have a Black teacher, and I am mixed Black and white, until I was in 9th grade, Denver public schools. And it was Miss Love. It was my biology teacher. And I had this moment where I said, well, dang, I didn't know biologists could be Black. I had this moment. And I think this is where it really ignites a fire in me and in the team at Study, where we are looking at, equity for underserved learners. And we're looking at what is the next generation of teachers? How do we hold up this honorable profession and make it so that our kids want to be teachers? There are
that data points, and those studies have been going on for decades now, as far as when was the first time you had a Black teacher or a minority teacher and so forth. And I have friends that didn't have one until they got to college.
That's right.
And so, and that's the type of thing that we're trying to, like you said, that we're trying to combat and raise here.
Exactly. So we have, one of our programs in South Carolina, the Center for Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Advancement, CERRA, SARA, is working with aspiring educators in high school that are looking at HBCUs, as an example, or other minority-serving institutions. Same thing in Mississippi. We're working with a nonprofit called Mississippi First that's doing something similar. And so we're really, and in Kentucky, we're with the state agency, and we're focused on first-generation immigrants who are interested in becoming teachers. So we're really looking at where are these innovative programs with diverse teacher pipelines. Kevin, if I can just say a word about Clark County School District in Nevada, because I think it mirrors something that's happening in New York. So as you know, but for the listeners, Clark County is the 5th largest school district in the nation. They have a wonderfully innovative teacher pipeline program where they are working with their paraprofessionals, so folks who have been teachers' aides in the classroom, to fast track them. So they have a 1-year bachelor's degree program through UNLV. And they're in a teacher prep program with a 1-year fast track, 12 months to becoming a teacher. And here's why it's important. For one, they've got on average 12 years experience in the classroom with our students. But in Clark County School District, I believe the statistics are the teachers are 70% white Anglo, 30% non-white. And the student body is exactly the opposite, right? Yep. 70%, right? The paraprofessionals in the program in Clark County that we're partnered with almost directly reflect the demographics of the student population, and not the opposite. Did you catch me?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I've seen that as well. But being a teacher and an administrator in my schools, you see that it's the teachers don't look like the students, but the paraprofessionals and all the other support staff in the building do. So it would make sense if you're trying to increase that population in teachers to tap those paraprofessionals who are coming there every day anyway, and the vast majority of them want to be full teachers, but they may not just be able to afford the classes. So now if you provide them an opportunity to attend, to fast track them so they use that experience they've gained over the last 15, 20 years that they've been there, you make it a lot easier for them to become a teacher, and a lot of them, that's fulfilling a dream that they've had.
Yes, that's exactly right. And they've had the commitment of being in the classroom. And over in your neighborhood, over at Camden U, it's at least in New Jersey, that part of the country, we're working with a hybrid college there that's doing the same thing, looking at parapro to BA through in partnership with the Camden School District. So there are these programs out there. We're working to find the small ones, give me 20 students, or give me 2,000 students. We will support and help with the pipeline.
So we've touched on some of these solutions to the teacher shortage problem that pretty much stem from or come down from the state education departments. What can be done on a little bit more local level as far as how can parents and other community members kind of get together and become advocates for the teachers that were probably within their own school districts to support those districts in either bringing in more people, more teachers in general, and definitely more teachers of color?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, absolutely, if you are a parent, is be kind, and you have students in the school system, whether it's a private school, a public charter. Be kind to your teachers and show respect, and let your students know that you respect their teachers, right? So I think that is, as a parent, as I mentioned, of a 10 and 12-year-old, I think for us, it starts at home. And as I am out in the community, helping to organize to support teachers, it's very basic to start with that. So you can see, well, we respect our doctors. We don't disparage our doctors. Why are we disparaging our teachers? So I think that's the first thing. I'd say the second thing is to find the public school in your neighborhood. And this is true. See what you can do to support it. This may sound like a bit of an aside, but there's a community garden. There's a school garden at both of the public schools within walking distance. And so we're working with Denver Urban Gardens to try to help bring a curriculum, bring the school building to life. Right. I think that principals and assistant principals and those in administration, I think it's a lonely place to be. I think it's easy to armchair quarterback decisions, especially in the last couple of years of school administrators. And so I would add them because, as you know, many school administrators, I think you had this pathway a bit, started as teachers. And so to show understanding and leniency when schools administrators need to make decisions they think are in the best interest of the community. It happened here in Colorado this last week. We don't need the details around it, but so I would say supporting teachers on an individual level, supporting school administrators, finding your neighborhood school, and then finding, if you really are interested and want to dig in, find the teacher pipeline program in your area and see if there's a way that you can support it. And you would be surprised. I mean, there are traditional state agency programs, but you mentioned New York Black Men Teach. There are innumerable small community-based nonprofit teacher residency, teacher ed preparation programs that we can be supporting. And so to reach out and say, who's training our teachers and how can I help?
Well, we would certainly like to thank our guest today, Ms. Dana Bryson, Senior Vice President of Social Impact at Study.com, for coming on to our show today. Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.